Many countries worldwide are facing potential food shortages because of export bans on rice that have been put in place first by India and then China. These moves prompted by projected poor harvests following months of bad weather. Well, to discuss, Oliver Farry from our International Affairs desk here at France 24 joins me now in studio. Oliver, firstly, what kind of implications are these measures likely to have right around the world?
Well, it could be quite grave in reality. India's move has sent alarm bells ringing worldwide. India has halted exports of about half of its rice production because of those poor harvests, which had pushed up prices. Now, India is by far the world's biggest exporter of rice, shipping 21.5 million tonnes in 2022, and that's about 40% of global trade. About half of that was non-basmati rice. Now, this is the rice that is affected by the export ban. Much of that goes to Africa, Bangladesh, and also to China. And a knock-on effect is China has now imposed its own export ban. It's not just Indian rice that has caused this, but also recent flooding in China's rice-growing northeast. China's export ban won't have such a big effect internationally. China is the world's biggest producer of rice, but it actually keeps most of its rice for itself. It exports only about 2.2 million tonnes per year. That's about a tenth of India's total, but it is indicative of a wider trend. Now, India has moved to ensure that prices don't get out of control. This is the primary concern of governments. For instance, in India, there are elections, parliamentary elections coming up next spring. Now, food insecurity can quickly lead to instability. We've seen a number of uprisings in recent years, particularly the Arab Spring in Egypt, which were preceded by food protests. Now, while governments obviously want to ensure that their citizens get fed, there's also a more pragmatic reason for caution. Now, most of the major rice exporting countries in the world are located in Asia, and they still have a couple of months more of both monsoons and typhoons to look forward to. So prices have already risen to their highest in 12 years, and it looks like they could rise further. And of course, climate change is a big factor in all of this. This has been exacerbated by adverse weather in various parts of the world. Even the United Kingdom is going to have a poor harvest this year because of a wet summer. There was the monsoon rains in India, flooding in both Pakistan and China. And it suggests that this might be a taste of things to come, where climate change greatly contributes to food insecurity, among other things.
And Oliver, we're not just talking about rice here. The suspension of the grain deal by Russia, and that also threatens to cause a scarcity of wheat around the world.
That's right. Last month, Moscow suspended the grain deal that had assured grain exports from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. It had been fairly successful, 33 million tonnes of grain leaving Ukrainian ports since the start of the war last year. Now, after renewing the deal twice, Russia then put an end to it, saying that Western countries were not honouring their commitments to allow Russian wheat exports to continue. Now, this was largely because sanctions on Russian banks had been making trade with Moscow very complicated for many third countries. Russia also claimed that only 4% of the grain from Ukraine was going to poorer countries. Now, that's not entirely true, because a lot of it was being bought up by intermediaries such as the World Food Programme, and prices did remain stable. Nonetheless, Western countries said exports to less developed countries were lower than desired. With exports of Ukrainian and Russian grain now being throttled, there's a big danger of shortages in all countries, not just developing ones. Richer countries will be able to muddle along and absorb the extra cost, but this isn't a luxury that's available to many poorer countries, particularly in Africa. Many countries rely on rice and other grains for much of the daily calorie intake of their citizens. Now, Vladimir Putin is acutely aware of this, and he's been using grain exports as a wedge issue to shore up support for Russia in the global south. Kiev has also accused Russia of torching Ukrainian wheat fields to further disrupt supplies. So what we're seeing here is a perfect storm, as it were, of conditions that could cause a lot of hardship in poorer countries, which could then in turn spill over into Western countries in the form of increased migration flows. And that's probably only the start of things.
Oliver, thank you so much for that analysis. That is Oliver Farry joining us from our International Affairs desk here at France 24.